morning to introduce Ben Niland Rowe. And it's also my pleasure to be part of your lesson, because as a prac teacher like Gillian at the moment, writing your first unit is something that is incredibly daunting, for new service teachers. So, Ben is a fifth-year English teacher at St Patrick's College in Shorncliffe. He's currently programme leader for English for years 7 to 9. And he's also responsible for writing and delivering units for his teaching team. He also assists graduate at the beginning teachers with writing and resourcing their units for the very first time. And he's experienced in teaching English from years 6 to 12, working in EQ and EREA schools. So, without further ado, I will hand over to Ben.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone. This kind of looks like one of those sessions that Kelly was talking about that needed a little bit more love, so I wonder if more people will sort of filter in as I go on. I guess I wanted to say, welcome first of all. I had this incredible nightmare a few nights ago that 5 people would show up, and 3 of them were from my school, teachers from my school. One of them was Kelly, and she was up the back marking me like I was back at uni. And the other one was just a uni student still, and she was eagerly writing down notes, and I felt like an incredible failure. So this is already a big improvement from my nightmare. So I guess just as was said, this is my 5th year in teaching. I sort of started off with journalism and media. Went back, and I guess the big thing that I was looking for when I started teaching was just something a little bit more fulfilling, and I guess actually that sort of links to this image here. At the end of last year, I got a chance to go to India with my school and do some teaching, and it was so incredible seeing these children, and they didn't have a lot, but they just had these incredible smiles and things like that, and that was just sort of something that I wasn't getting in my my other jobs. So I sort of really made a conscious choice to dive into my teaching, and my sort of current role is helping a lot of graduates write units and resource their units and try and make that transition from university as easy as possible. And not only that as well, like there's teachers that come into new sort of learning environments, and maybe they just don't have the skills to write a unit because they've been at a different school or anything. There's lots of variables, but I guess sort of based on today, there's lots of transferable skills as well, and that's what we're going to look at. So if you haven't got the 2 handouts down the front here, now's probably the time to grab them. I guess sort of my big thing is that there's a lot that you can take away from this and apply to your schools, regardless of the pedagogical framework, regardless of a Catholic school or a EQ school, and then also if you change schools, these are skills that you'll be able to take with you, hopefully. Now, I guess I'll preface this slide by saying that I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and we were looking over our NAPLAN data, and I'm English teacher, I'm not a number person, and there's the maths nerds, and they're talking about the NAPLAN data, and some senior staff, and they're talking about like how we went and our growth and all these algorithms and stuff like this, and it was just all noise to me, and I just said, look, can someone just tell me what we're doing here? Can someone explain what we are actually trying to achieve in this? So I don't mean for this to be condescending by having a learning goal, but I definitely think that this is something we have in classrooms, and I think it's something that we need to take with us and practice what we preach. So the purpose of this, I want you to walk out of here understanding the role and purpose of cognitive verbs in backward mapping English units. And that applies specifically to the resources as well. Like this stuff, along the journey I've picked up a few things, and I've trimmed the fat a little bit, and I've added some things that have worked for me. So that's what I want you to be able to do. I think you'll get to that point today. If you contribute, feel free to put your hand up. Feel free to discuss these ideas, and then you'll sort of feel confident, I think, taking these things back and applying them to units if you get that opportunity, which would be great. But also just in lessons, just any particular specific learning experience. So this is sort of the three sort of chunk sections that we're going to look at today. So cognitive verbs, backward mapping, we'll get an idea of both of those things together and then sort of put them together and put it into practice. And there's an example there on the slide, on the resources rather, that shows a backward mapped unit, sort of looking really closely at the learning goals. So for those of you that are maybe a part of ASOT schools, you may be familiar with Mazzano and Kendall. So cognitive verbs, just by definition, the mental process that students go through. So it's all about retrieval, comprehension, analysing, and then using that information. So when you think about it in that way, it's a very logical way of approaching teaching, how your students are thinking, how they need to think. So if you start off with something, you're looking at the lower order. You're looking at maybe just a definition, just a simple definition. And then hopefully by the time we get to the end of a unit or the end of a week, we can provide the students with everything they need to evaluate. Okay, and that's sort of what we're working towards when we look at something that's an assessment item perhaps. First question, and go back to the success criteria. So I need you to engage with me, and hopefully you've all had your first coffee. That last session looked very, very fun, so I'm not going to try and sort of dip off, but can somebody please tell me what the cognitive verb is for today's session? Understand. Okay. Now, on the resource that I gave you, the syllabus, the QCAA syllabus, where does understand fit under? Can anybody see that? The next one. The next one.
I was going to say, from memory from some of our PDs that we've had, understand, is it something that we're really doing, trying to move away from it?
Yeah. So I just took this straight from that, and that's probably a good sort of approach to it. This is just straight from QCAA, and it is really sort of lower order sort of thinking. We've only got 20 minutes together, and that's the expectation. I'm not sort of putting a ceiling on your cognitive ability at all, but if I think that's sort of realistic for us. If we maybe had a few weeks together, I'd get you up to evaluation, but today, that's all we've got. So this is just a way of sort of categorising it, and again, sort of the point that you made was very valid because this is what we're given, and it's pretty sort of clearly aligned to the QCAA, and sort of very rigid and stuff like that. But for me, this is sort of something that I put together just along the journey, sort of, I think, as a logical approach to how students learn and how they need to be presented with information in order to get to that end point. Then these are the sort of words, the cognitions that they need to be presented with in their lessons to get them up to the top there. Okay, so I'm not going to sort of say, well, look, I need all of you here to evaluate cognitive verbs by the end of this session. I mean, that's unrealistic, and we can't expect our students to think like that either. Okay, so we need to go up step by step, and that is a logical way of thinking. And I guess if we're putting students in the position where we're jumping too far up too quickly, then we're going to lose them. So I was talking earlier during the first session with someone, and she was saying that it's tough to get the students to engage at her school, and that's a valid point. But if we're jumping straight to analysis without sort of going through the necessary steps, then it's understandable. We're going to lose them. If we can't make it accessible for them, we are going to lose them. Okay, so a visual like that I think is helpful. Okay, so backward mapping. Today, again, time constraints, so we're sort of sticking within the green here, so the identifying concepts and skills. Now, this is, again, another good definition that I got from New South Wales Department of Education. So backward mapping is the identification of central skills and concepts students will need. And once they have been identified, that's your starting point. By way of planning, that's your starting point. So that overarching sort of skill and concept or concepts, that's where you start everything from. That's a logical way of looking at it. Okay, there's no point planning all these specific lessons, planning all these weeks of work, and then realising you get to the end of the unit and you haven't touched on a lot of things necessary in order to access the piece of assessment they need to do. Okay, so it's a good way of thinking about it. So the way that sort of cognitive verbs come into it is that they're sort of added to the learning goals. So they help access those concepts and those skills. So work hand in hand and then get to that end point. So this is sort of now where we can use sort of both of these pieces of information. And this is a unit that we did this year. It was really successful. The purpose of this was to get students interacting, Year 8 students. I'm at a boys' school. That is a chore. That is a massive chore. So getting them to engage and interact with poetry. So this had to be a really sort of thorough, methodical unit that was planned. And so this is sort of the way that we went about it. Now, I guess sort of from my sort of position as a program leader, if I'm sitting down with a graduate, if I'm sitting down with a 20-year teacher who just hasn't taught, who hasn't written a unit before, there's a way that you can go about it just to make this process as easy as possible. And again, this is something that maybe works for me and how sort of I explain it. But I imagine that you'll tweak this as you go along. And I think that's important to reflect on your own practice and make those changes as well. Just a suggestion. So all of this is able to be adapted for your school and your own practice. When you sit down, there's probably things that will be given to you. So the content you'll probably get. So you'll know the novel that you're studying, the type of poetry, if it's a particular film, whatever the case may be, you will get that. Okay. The type of assessment you probably know. You've been given a scope and sequence for the year, so you know that you have to do a persuasive essay. You have to do an informative essay, whatever the case may be. You'll get that information. The length of the unit and the due dates, you'll probably get that as well. All of that together as a starting point, it probably doesn't seem like much. It sort of seems like a bit of admin, but that will help start the process. So really important that you get all of that together. Now, I'm sitting down and I've got a graduate teacher beside me. So we have all of this information and that's the first step. All right, gather as much of that as possible, have it with us. Make a full list of the concepts and skills that be required. Okay, so these are with the use of that sort of information that's from step 1, you can identify those concepts and skills. You'll be able to do that. And entirely necessary in order to make a list of cognitive verbs. And again, this is all very logical because when you think of the concepts and skills, just pair up the cognitive verbs. So in order to access that skill or that concept, they need to be able to do something. They need to think about it. They need that process. They need to be thinking in a certain way to access that concept. Learning goals for the unit. So at the end of the unit, the students will be able to do this. Really, really important. For me, and when I'm sort of going through this process, it's all about being really accountable with those cognitive verbs as well. So you'll see on the plan there, the unit planner, all of the cognitive verbs are bolded. So I know that I'm hitting them. I need to hit them. All of the ones that are part of the unit learning goals are in red and bolded. So they're the sort of bigger picture, the overarching cognitions that my teachers need to hit, and it draws attention to them and you're accountable for them. So really important that you identify them for yourself, and going into every lesson, every week, every block of teaching that you're ticking these boxes. So you break that down even further, and then you look at the learning goals for the week. Okay? So if everyone just has this document out in front of them, this is where we get to have a discussion and engage and really explore the practical space that we have in front of us. So let's get amongst it. If you have a look at the flow of the learning goals, sort of what do you see there? So I just spoke of the fact that some of them are bolded, some of them are put in red. How do you recognise the flow of everything? So for me, I look at like the first week, and it's define, identify, understand, discuss. Very sort of lower order. Okay. Is that the same in week 2? Is it the same in week 3? Is it the same in week 4? Yeah. Okay. So the cognitions are going up. Now, if you go back to that sort of step by step, this is sort of the direction that we need to be moving. There's also a really important point. So if you go to week 7, the first one there, students will understand draft feedback. So understand is something that like we're looking at for today in a 20-minute session. But we're also using it, or it was used here, in week 7, just before the assessment. So these don't sort of stand alone. These can be chunked in, and they're linked to a particular learning sequence. So they only just got their draft back, so they need to understand their draft feedback, but it's applying it to a sort of higher order learning experience because they're talking about their assessment piece. So yeah, they do need to understand that. We've only got a couple minutes left. We sort of discussed that. Is there anything else that you can sort of see? Any other questions or thoughts on that? Yeah.
We're writing cognitive PowerPoints at our school at the moment.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty big process, especially with I'm doing civics and citizenship.
Yeah.
That's challenging me a bit. What would you like?
So do you mean like getting the boys? Oh, sorry, I got boys. Getting the students to engage with.
Yeah. Have you used that at your school? Are you doing how are you using the cognitive PowerPoints apart from the unit plans?
Yeah. So all of our sort of students are aware of the cognition for that lesson. Mm-hmm. So when they're looking at the learning goal for the lesson, they have to identify the cognition and be able to. So we'll unpack the learning goal in that sense. So, and that's not something that they'll get straight away. It may take a few weeks and a few times of using a particular cognition to understand it. But then they also know how their brain's supposed to think. And it sort of comes down to you as well as the teacher going through that metacognitive process of just thinking out loud and saying, well, I know that I need to define this in order to get to this. So that helps them through that process as well. So just making it really clear, telling them how to think. Yeah. You know how to think, you know how to get from A to B, but
putting it in student front.
Yeah, making it accessible for them is really important. So I think that's really good from your school. But yeah, I guess you always need to put yourself in the shoes of the students and sort of they may not have that understanding of how to think, which seems so strange, but they need to know how to go through that cognitive process. 1 minute. Has anybody got a 1 minute question? No?
I was just
Yeah.
wanting to hear what you said about the bolded and red.
Yeah.
Unit plan.
Yeah.
Was unit learning goals and bold was cognitive goals.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess, and you can see sort of the colour sort of change as you progress through the unit. And again, I think that's sort of an accountability thing, we need to be moving up the higher order cognitions as we get towards the assessment. Yeah.
Do you use those colours with your kids as well in the learning goals? So if they see it's red, they know that it needs that higher order thinking?
So they will have access to the unit plan, so they will be able to see that. It's more like for the purpose of the teacher though. But I think like by the time we get to the end of the unit, they know the cognition that they're doing. So it's kind of, they probably don't understand like that particular process and that layout, but hopefully they know the cognition.
But you did just say your kids have access to the unit plan.
Yeah, yeah.
We don't do that for ours because you might get the ones who are too attached to housekeeping or OCD tendencies and freak out if you're not doing exactly what was allocated for that lesson.
Yeah.
How do you cope with that? You know, you need to be flexible.
Yeah. So we sort of have like learning sort of activities. So it's not explicit in a lesson by lesson. It's not really prescriptive in that manner. So it's sort of like a weekly outline, and these are the learning activities that we'll go through. Yeah. So, but yeah, that's a good question. Sorry about that. Sorry, guys. Okay, great. All right. Thank you.